Hey everyone, welcome to week 54. This is day one. This is Monday. We're back to our daily videos. For this week, the theme is going to be something that I've been wanting to try for many years now. I didn't give myself the chance, but I'm going to give it a try now. Water mixable oil paint. So we'll see how it goes. Okay, let's get started. This is going to be our week back after our week number 53, where we did an interview with the awesome RVK, Ruprecht von Kaufmann. We received so many cool comments from you guys, and honestly, we are super grateful that you liked this exercise that we did. It wasn't so much of an interview as it was a conversation, like a very genuine conversation between, I want to say, two artists, but but honestly, I think so highly of Ruprecht von Kaufmann that I really feel that he is at a whole different level. So I can accept my life and I can say that I'm always going to look up to him. Me as a painter, I'm always very happy when I can find, interviews, conversations, podcasts, where I can feel the human being behind the painter, where that person and, their intent is not hidden underneath art talk. Those conversations are actually super nice. I was a teacher at the art faculty for 12 years, probably taught painting and drawing for 3 years before that. So I'm going to say I've taught for 15 years, and I love art speak. I love reflecting upon art. I really do. But I think I also yearn for those conversations where you can speak to the human being behind the painting and where you don't have to concentrate on the artist's statement, where you can just start a conversation based on respect and you can just take it from there. And, imagine that this was a conversation that you would have with a person in a very chilled, kind of laid back manner where you're not just trying to extract information. I think that many times that's what we see, or where you're not asking like gotcha questions, where you're not trying to put their intent into question. No, I think it's super nice where you just say, hey, I'm along here for the ride. I'm already a fan. So let's pick it up from there and let's just have like this really nice conversation. I really want to try and do this a little bit more. I don't know if you guys like the format. Let me know in the comments below, because I know that it's also really nice when we can have videos Monday through Friday. But if it's a 2-hour video, you can split it up and you don't have to listen to the whole thing, in one sitting. You can give yourself time. So I really like the format. So if you want to look at my painting as you're listening, if you want that visual company, you still have it. And if you want to just listen in and every 10 minutes just kind of peek at the screen and see how I'm doing with my painting, that's also super cool. But I think it's a cool format. I think that there's so many interesting artists that we can do this with that I think it's going to be a cool thing for 2021. I'm not going to force it. I know that we have a format, and it's a format that I really like. And I think that there's something to be said about having, this daily company that we can provide to you guys with for Monday through Friday. But I think this is also quite interesting. So I think we'll give it a shot. If I can have these really cool and what I believe to be meaningful conversations with people that I respect, I'm definitely going to do it. And I think they're going to be enriching experiences. So even though we have to sacrifice a little bit of the Monday through Friday themed weeks, we can still do it from time to time, maybe once every couple of weeks. And I think it's a nice bit of change. Painting is still going to be there. I'm still going to try to reflect upon the conversation that I had with the artist that I'm talking to. And based upon that, I'm going to design what I'm going to do for the week. So it's always going to be linked in some way. And if you guys have heard me speak about this whole project, I think that that's a very important part of the essence of what we're making, which is that everything kind of connects to each other. Even though we can have hard segues like we are going to have this week, hopefully in the end it's all connected. These are the roots of one single painting exercise that is this 2-year project. So thank you so much for all the super cool comments. I think the reception that you gave to what we are proposing, to this exercise that we're proposing, was a really warm one, a really nice one, and we really do appreciate it. So if I have the opportunity to talk to very interesting people, I will certainly try to make the best of that. So hopefully we have more of these in the future. Okay, having said that, let's get started with this week's theme, which is going to be water miscible oils, water mixable oils, water soluble oils. I've been meaning to try these for the longest time. And there is a sense of curiosity. I'm always willing to try things out, but there's an actual, I guess, medical reason to do this. And I'm going to try to explain this. There was a time in my painting career where I was super, super interested in doing old school painting, like super faithful old school painting. I think that I tried to balance my lack of knowledge. I came out of school being capable of painting, and I've talked about this before, but not really understanding what I was doing. I was just mimicking the things that I was told to do, but I really didn't understand the reason behind, me doing those actions. So right out of school, if you would have asked me to explain what a resin was or what a balsam was or what a solvent was, I wouldn't have been able to tell you. I would have just been able to kind of repeat like a parrot the recipes that my teachers gave me. And I would have just said, well, this is the way you use them, because I would have just been mimicking the way they used them. But I didn't understand at all why we were using the materials that we were using. So I think I felt this need to counter that with just having like this excess of information and trying to be as faithful to the foundation of our painting practice. Foundation of our painting practice, meaning the knowledge that we had amassed throughout centuries and which we had evidence of. We could look back at paintings of Van Eyck, at paintings of Velázquez, at paintings of Rembrandt, of Rubens, and we could say, okay, this is what they did, and this is what paintings look like 450, 500 years later. This is how stable they are. So we have on our side the aid of history. We can look back upon paintings and exercises and trials that painters did throughout time, and we can say, wow, look at how stable this effort was, and we can learn from those experiences and we can put them to use today. I was about to say I used to love that. I still love that. I love the chemistry part of painting. I love the almost culinary part of painting. This side where you have to be in a kitchen and you have to try and understand what the role of every one of those materials that you're working with is, and then put that to use when painting. Try to accommodate all of those things to your intent. If you want to produce a very specific painting, what's the best way to produce it in the sense of how to use your materials in order to help you get closer to that intent. I really love that. And even nowadays when I see people working very proficiently with very traditional mediums, that actually ticks something inside of me that I love and that I profoundly respect. The thing is, I have a personality that also wants to explore further. If somebody tells me, no, you shouldn't do that, I'm the sort of person that says, well, why not? I need to know more information. Like, why would we say you shouldn't do that? And basically the answer that you hear the most is because the painting will become unstable and it will degrade, far quicker than it will if you paint it based on all these experiences that we've gathered throughout time, which are now proven to be very, very stable. But, I can't deny the person that I am, so I'm always going to be trying things out, and I'm always going to be willing to make sacrifices based upon my own sensitivity. I think that as an artist, that's the only thing that we can do. We don't have to accommodate ourselves to a way in which things are supposed to be done. No, if we want to push, if we have that curiosity, and if we do it in a very reflective manner, like if we're conscious of what we're doing, and if we are telling people, hey, I'm taking these actions, I'm going on this journey because of these reasons, I think it's all fine. I think painting is not this monolithic thing that can't be bothered, that can't be adjusted. No, painting is just a way in which we are trying to find answers, and those answers are not universal answers. Those answers are very particular to us, to our lives, to our journeys, to our experiences. So I don't think you can say that painting is one thing that should be respected. No, it's an effort that we have done as mankind to try and understand ourselves through the use of painting. But that's about it. But the possibilities are meant to be endless. Now, going back to what I was saying and how I was trying to counter my lack of knowledge with the adoption of all these traditional skills, I started using completely traditional mediums, What that meant was that I was using, for example, turpentine. Real turpentine is my solvent. And I actually needed that solvent because I was using mediums that had heavy-bodied oils. I was using stand oil as my medium. I was using a variation of Tsjêbbe's medium, which is basically a glazing medium. A medium that has a heavy-bodied oil with a resin and a balsam. It's traditionally understood as a glazing medium. And Steve would use it as a regular medium, which is kind of crazy, but it works perfectly for what he does, for his technique, for how he understands his technique better. And I was kind of using that medium, which meant that I wanted to try and use traditional solvent because you have to cut that medium. That medium, if you mix stand oil, Canada balsam, and Damar varnish, if you mix that, you might as well use it as mortar and build a brick house because that stuff is like molasses. That stuff is unmanageable. If you don't cut it with turpentine, you're never going to be able to use that as a medium. So I took it upon myself to say, I'm going to find a place that produces real turpentine, not this crap solvent that was produced for decades, where they were trying to accelerate the production of turpentine. Because turpentine actually takes a long time to produce, but if you wanted to produce it in mass quantities, you would have to accelerate that process. And that would produce, yes, a solvent, but a much more corrosive solvent in a way, which would obviously cut down paint and would cut down oil and resin and balsam, because that's what a solvent would do. But it was also a lot more harmful to us in the sense that it was a far harsher irritant. So I took it upon myself to try and find the purest turpentine that I could find here in Colombia, in Bogota. And I actually found a place and I bought a gallon of that. It was very expensive. Even though I was working at a large-ish room, I was able to produce large paintings, I was still sleeping in that very same room. And there was a time where I was doing this, very large painting, and I had to open my window at nights, and I had to move my bed like right next to the window, and I would have to lean my head almost to the frame of the window so I could breathe fresh air, because my room, and I'm guessing my parents' house, because I was painting at my parents' house at that time, was for sure stinking of solvent and resin and balsam. And those things, if you start breathing them constantly, they're never going to be good for you. It got to a point where I was doing this very large painting, which took me about 8 months to do. And at some point during that painting, my throat was killing me. It was literally burning. And I was like, okay, I think I'm pushing this a little too far. And I think I'm doing something that's not good for me. Even though this was good terps, even though I was using very expensive traditional mediums, because I was buying like super nice handmade mediums, I realized that I was trying to be as close to what history taught me were these wonderful mediums. I also realized, wow, this is not good for you. And I remember having to stop for a while and having to vent that room for a long time. And then I had to tell myself, I have to change something because it is affecting my health. Unfortunately for me, having painted for almost every single day for over 20 years now, and having been in classrooms full of a variety of mediums and solvents, I think one of the things that I lost was a bit of a sense of smell. And this is not to say that I can't smell anything. No, of course not. When my kids were born, I would smell a dirty diaper. Like, I can still smell that. Like, I wish I would have lost that. But no, I still have that ability. For example, if I go into a room where 20 people are working with solvent, and not with odorless solvent, obviously, but with, actual turpentine, like, I won't smell it, and it doesn't give me a headache. And I'm not saying this is a superpower. This is probably that I burnt a lot of neurons doing this, and I have nervous damage. And I'm not saying I'm proud of that, but I'm just saying that that's unfortunately what happened. But I did take a stand years ago, and I told myself, I'm not going to paint with traditional mediums anymore. I'm going to try to cut back as much as I can. As much as I can. That's the important part. Now, I was doing that, obviously, to try to cut down on solvent. Nowadays, there's like solvent-free mediums, and there's been tons of advances in, I was going to say healthier mediums, but they're never quite healthy, all these things. So, I'm talking about changes that I had to do about 12 years ago, maybe. And I didn't have all these mediums at my disposal. Here in Bogota, in Colombia, we can't really find those mediums. They're not really accessible to us. So what I tried to do at that point was to say, okay, I'm not going to use solvent anymore. So I'm not going to have turpentine or any odorless solvent lying around. I don't want that. I don't want to live with that. All that stuff is irritating, even if it doesn't smell. I mean, the smell part of it, even though it can give us a headache, is actually a good sign because it tells us how volatile that solvent can be. You know, it's airborne and we're inhaling all that stuff and you can actually gauge it. The bad thing about odorless thinners is that you don't smell them, so you don't really understand how much of that medium you're inhaling. So that's not a good thing. That's not at all a good thing. So I've cut back on my use of solvent. And I've even given workshops where we just use paint, straight paint. And people go like, wow, how are we going to paint? You know, it's almost unmanageable. And I always remind people there is medium in paint. The binder that we use in paint, in oil paint, is drying oil. You know, it's linseed oil, safflower oil. The drying oil varies, but there's plenty of oil in that paint. Based upon that, I did some workshops where I told people when you don't have medium, when you don't have solvent, you just concentrate on paint handling. That's all you're going to concentrate on. You have to be sort of aggressive with your paint, bold with your paint, but you also have to be very, very careful. And you're going to have to learn almost like the hard way to try to make adjustments. And I think that even though it's a little extreme, I think that's the best way to do it. So why am I saying all of this when trying to speak about water mixable paint? Because we haven't even touched that subject. I'm saying this because I think that in many ways, my path is leading me towards something like water mixable oil paints. And you could say, well, why not just acrylics? Why don't you make a transition towards acrylics? I've tried to paint with acrylic paint. I've done a few paintings with acrylics. I just don't know. I think that, you know, it's one of those things where you almost accept that you were meant to paint with oil paint. And I think that that's been my path. I think that I was meant to create this bond with oil paint, to have this relationship with oil paint. And I have been doing so for the last, over 20 years. And it's not easy for me to say, I'm going to just transition towards acrylics because unfortunately, I'm going to see acrylics as something that is not oils because I'm comparing it with oils. I'm not seeing acrylics for what they have to offer to me. I'm always going to be, well, you could do this with oil paint and you can't do this with acrylic paint. And oil paint doesn't transform in the way acrylic paint does. So I'm always going to see, and I don't want to say always, but I think that what has happened until now is that I see natural characteristics of acrylics as flaws because I compare them to oil paint. And, these water miscible paints, these water miscible oil paints, in theory, they are probably that halfway point where I can eliminate fully the use of anything that has solvent in it and just use water. Just use water for my initial wash and, some of the initial block-in, and then use straight paint. And I would be totally, totally fine with doing that. I've been super hesitant about trying these colors. And the truth is, the other day, I was buying some cheap colors at an art store that I usually go to, and I saw these water mixable oil paints. And I was like, okay, maybe this is the time, because up until that point, they didn't have that paint available in that store. I would have had to buy it through the internet. And I always have to buy it and have it shipped to a P.O. box that I have in the U.S. And then that P.O. box sends it to me back here to Bogota. And I have to pay taxes and import fees. And it's always obviously way more expensive than the actual retail price of the product. So if it's not something I need, I'm always like, no, I'll try to buy, whatever I can get here, and I'm fine with that. But I saw them there. They were very cheap. I'm using Winston's Artisan water mixable paint. It's probably comparable to the Winston line of Winsor Newton, the name that you guys already know I don't like, I dislike quite a bit, which is the quote-unquote student-grade paint that Winsor Newton produces. But I was like, no, I'm okay. I'm okay with this being my intro to this. I don't want to spend like a huge amount of money and then realize with one painting that I really dislike the way this paint handles. Now, I tried to read a little bit on the makeup of this particular brand of water mixable oil paint, and it has a mixture of linseed oil and modified safflower oil. So the modified part of safflower oil is the part that, even though I can read it and I can try and make sense of it, I'm going to say I'm not a chemist, I'm not a chemical engineer. I would be lying if I told you guys I can really explain what a modified oil is. I think I understand it. And even though this is a lot more complex, because saying modified oil doesn't mean one thing, there are tons of ways drying oils and non-drying vegetable oils can be modified. There are tons of uses for all those oils, from cosmetics to biodiesels to the food industry to dyes and paints and plastics. So the range of how you can modify an oil is very, very extensive. Now, the one that interests us here is the fact that they can actually modify an oil so it becomes an emulsifier. Now, what that means is that it can actually bridge the gap between oil and water. So if you think about it in egg tempera, the emulsifier is the egg yolk. That is the part that is enabling us to either use oil or use water as our medium. In this case, they modify safflower oil, so it becomes an emulsifier, so it bridges that gap, and we can use drying oils if we want as a medium, or we can use plain water. Now, obviously, for the intent of these paintings, I'm solely going to use water. I'm not going to use any of the mediums they sell, the water miscible mediums they sell. I'm not going to use any of them. First of all, because they're not available here. And second of all, because I just want to try the paints out. I want to see how the pigment and the mixture of these two binders feels when compared to oil paint. For this first painting, I'm not going to be using, I'm going to say fully or wholly, the ability to create washes. I'm just going to use straight paint. I want to see how that straight paint feels. I'm super used to using straight paint. I think you guys can tell, when I do these daily painting exercises, that I very rarely use my medium past that initial layer of paint. After that, it's just pure paint on top of pure paint, and I'm totally fine with handling paint that way. So I'm going to give that a try, and I'm going to speak a little more about this in the upcoming days. But as a hot take, I mean, this is a terrible hot take because these paints have been in the market for 15 years, I feel, probably more than that. I know they were kind of crappy at the beginning, and I think they've gotten a lot better. As my very late hot take, I'm going to say that I think their handling is somewhat close. I think the paint consistency is quite different. It's a very, if I could describe it, even though it doesn't make sense, there's a stiff, buttery feel to it. Some pigments feel grainier than others. I bought my regular palette, so I bought titanium white, yellow ochre, cat red, alizarin crimson, raw umber, and ultramarine blue. And for example, the umber, and I don't know if this is a problem with earth tones, but the umber feels very grainy, and I can feel that in some other pigments. So even though there's this stiff, buttery feel to them, it doesn't quite feel like a smooth paint. It doesn't feel like stiff oil paint either. So it certainly is its own flavor. But as soon as I put enough paint down, it was just a very regular exercise of putting paint against paint. And that's something that I'm very used to. Some people are not going to like this, but I'm still working on raw paper. So I already know how oil paint behaves in raw paper, and I've gotten so used to it. It's incredible. I'm noticing, and again, this is only my first experience, but I noticed from the start that it does behave a little bit differently. I'm guessing that the paper does absorb some of these two oils, the linseed oil and the modified safflower oil, very quickly. So I'm left with this very, again, stiffish, creamy paint to handle on top. And it's far more matte than I was thinking that it was going to be. So the color is grayer for sure. I'm pretty sure that if I put like a layer of retouch varnish in the end, it's going to bring out some of that natural color. But as far as the handling at that moment with, fresh color, you can actually tell that the binder, for sure, the modified safflower oil is having an effect on that pigment, and it's actually lowering that saturation. Again, I'm using cheaper water mixable paint, so I'm pretty sure that if there was a quote-unquote professional grade paint where the pigment load would be a lot higher, where there wasn't need of any fillers, the handling of that color and the way I perceive that color, its saturation would be, I'm going to guess, greatly affected. So that's a caveat. I am using a raw surface. I'm not using any mediums. I'm just using water, and I'm using straight paint, but paint that is actually cheap. Why am I doing those things? Because I want to have the rawest experience of what this painting feels like. I don't want it to be helped by mediums. I don't want it to be helped by a primed surface. No, I just want to see what this paint can do. So this is this paint at its barest form. And I think that that is, at least in my experience, or at least the experience that I want to have, I think that that is the best way in which I can tell, how this pure paint behaves. For now, I'm going to wait till the end of the week to give it a final judgment. I think today was just an intro and just the feeling out of this first experience that I have with paint, but we'll see how that progresses. So that was it for today. Thank you guys for hanging out. Again, super grateful for all your comments regarding the conversation with RVK. Keep an eye out for more of those conversations in the future. I had a blast doing it, and I think it could be a really nice complement to the daily videos. So that's going to be it. Remember, tomorrow, Spanish Tuesdays, Martes de Español, brush up on your Spanish. We'll see you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye.